Hey guys, welcome back to Nitrate, our new podcast where we talk about movies worth talking about. I'm Erin and this is Micah.
Today we are talking about Donnie Darko.
So Donnie Darko is a 2001 American science fiction psychological thriller written and directed by Richard Kelly. The film follows the adventures of the troubled title character played by Jake Gyllenhaal as he seeks to find the meaning behind his doomsday-related visions. So we love Donnie Darko. We love Jake Gyllenhaal. Who doesn't? That's where we're coming from.
I do. Jake Gyllenhaal picks great movies all the time.
Yeah.
I feel like he must just I don't know how acting works, but whoever picks movies for him does a good job.
He's charmed, for sure. He's got the luck on his side.
Absolutely. So first of all, the music in this movie is fantastic. It is funny how you look at the original cut, which didn't do super well, when the movie came out. And everyone thought it was just too kind of cerebral and dreamlike. And it had definitely a lot of certain characteristics that the director's cut did not have. The director's cut made a lot more sense and kind of just lays everything out in front of you and makes it really obvious what's going on. But at the same time, it loses everything that makes it an interesting movie. So I would, first of all, recommend you watch the original cut of the movie and not the director's cut. If you want to watch the director's cut to really understand it, you can, but the original cut is much better vibe.
Did we watch the original cut?
The original. Mm-hmm. The director's cut plays out like a PowerPoint. So basically in the movie, the book about the time travel, what's it called? Philosopher's Guide to Time Travel, I think, something like that. They show pages from it in between scenes in the director's cut, and so it makes a lot more sense what's going on, and it explains all of the weird phenomena that you see on screen. But at the same time, the mystery and the kind of figuring out how it works makes a lot more sense to me.
Cool. Profound. On my part. I don't really even know where to start with this. Is the starting point with this movie, what was your take on the ending? What was your take on the twist? What was your take on the time travel?
Tell them what the movie's about.
Okay, so it's basically about this young kid who has schizophrenia, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. And he's pretty well liked at school, but he's kind of an alternative type of personality, doesn't really fit in to the typical groups. And in the beginning of the movie, he's in his house and there's what appears to be some type of earthquake, but you end up finding out that, and obviously spoilers, always spoilers in these videos, but you end up finding out that it's a plane engine that has fallen on his house, on his bedroom, but because of he had a schizophrenic episode, he was not in bed, not in his room, not in his house. He was elsewhere and thus was saved. So that's kind of how it starts. And then in the movie, he goes on to meet this girl and kind of develop this really strong relationship with her. He has this schizophrenic imaginary friend named Frank, and this is this sort of iconic man in a bunny suit, creepy looking guy. I really think that maybe what's most interesting about this movie is how it culminates at the end. I mean, everything else is, I don't know, it somewhat typical, like a typical sort of psychological thriller until it gets to the end, and that's the most interesting thing to talk about. Do you want to sort of sum up the ending and the turn that it takes?
All right, so this is going to be a spoiler, but in the end, basically, the movie is set up as this crazy thing happens and he wasn't there for it, and you kind of set off this new branch of time where the original, I guess you'd call it, timeline kind of goes on pause for a second, and it shows him this alternate reality of what would happen if he wasn't there, and then it comes back to the original reality in which he does get killed by the jet engine. So at the very end of the movie, you see his whole family crying. What's funny about the movie, for me, I'd never ever seen this before. I'd seen the movie quite a few times, but I'd never noticed this detail.
Wait, hold on. Which reality do you think is real?
Well, hold on, let me get to that. So
okay.
I think, to me, it became really clear upon this most recent viewing that this is like a Jesus Christ type story where you realize Donnie represents a Christ figure, and Patrick Swayze represents, what's his name? can't remember what his character's name is, but Patrick Swayze kind of
yeah, he's
represents.
the Antichrist.
Yeah, he called.
The
Yeah.
Antichrist.
So Donnie calls him the Antichrist, which I'd never really read into before. I thought he was just being a turd, but I realized that it is kind of set up as like a Christ dying for other people story. I don't really know a better way to word that, but yeah, it shows one reality where he doesn't die and all these things happen and he takes down all these people and his life has a lot of meaning and a lot of things
Jim
happen.
Cunningham was his name, Patrick
Jim
Swayze's
Cunningham,
character.
that's his name. But then it goes back to the original setting and shows him dying. And the really weird thing about my theory that it's like a Jesus Christ type story is it's completely kind of turned on its head. You know, in the reality where he doesn't die, he's able to take down all these people. But in the reality where he does die, it almost has no meaning. The only way that I found the movie actually scraped together any meaning from him actually dying was that you see at the end, the girl that he, on the other timeline, ended up being in a relationship with and dying. She didn't die, and she did wave at the mom at one point, and I kind of read that as them forming a connection, almost kind of symbolizing, you know, appreciating the people that are here and how death kind of does that, I think. Like, death is obviously not a good thing, but, you know, when it happens, I think it can bring new appreciation for the people that are already around you.
Okay, let me interrupt you for 1 second because I thought it was interesting what you were saying about the Christ connection. So I had also put that in my notes.
Really?
Okay, so you know the movie that they went to see, and you said it was your favorite scene where they're in the movie theater?
I was going to mention that part too.
And quick disclaimer, you guys, we are not really here to do great synopses. That's not really what we're doing. So we're going to kind of describe...
We're assuming you've already seen it.
Yeah, we're going to describe some things in the movies as far as it helps to communicate just what we want to share about our thoughts on it, but we probably are not a great place to come if you haven't seen it and you're looking for a really thorough sort of Cliff Notes version. But yeah, so Micah had told me when we were watching the movie that his favorite scene, or one of his favorite scenes, was where Gretchen, the girlfriend, and Donnie are in the movie theater, and then Frank shows up next to them. The movie that they saw, and it was on the sign outside of the theater, was called I think it might have actually been meant to be two movies, but the way that it reads on the sign is as if it's one long sentence, and it says The Evil Dead, The Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah, I put that in my notes too because that, just on top of everything else, kind of added to... In the scene when Frank shows up in the theater, I thought it was interesting how he said, basically he told him, look, you should go to this guy's house and burn it down. And it just was almost like, it was just weird. I almost want to like start over because I feel like I could flesh out these thoughts so much better if I had it kind of collected in my mind, but I don't. I just have all these little pieces of ideas.
I know. I mean, that's my problem with this movie too. But let me ask you this, and maybe like asking each other questions will really help to figure it out. But what were some of the maybe like top two things in the movie that made you draw that conclusion, sort of the Christ parallel?
So the top two things were the comment on the Antichrist, the fact that he's sacrificing himself for others, and it seems that at the end of the movie he's willing to do that, and there seems to be a purpose for it. But I never really figured out what it was that he was really dying for. I didn't know why.
To save Gretchen, because in the alternate reality, I don't know which one you think is real, but in one she lives and in one he lives. This is the path to the truth about Donnie Darko.
Yeah. But I'm forgetting details about things that I noticed in the movie, and then I'm gonna have to like have you remind me, and then it's gonna make my points look like they're falling flat.
I feel like if a conversation about Donnie Darko is not confusing and circular and strange, then it's not fitting. You know what I mean?
So points that make me think of him as like a Jesus figure are the Last Temptation of Christ moment, the moment where he calls Jim Cunningham the Antichrist, and the fact that he dies to keep Gretchen from dying. That does kind of bring it full circle. That does kind of explain everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why I never read it that way. I feel stupid. I've seen this movie so many times, and
Yeah.
I've never read it as him dying for Gretchen.
Well, that's the
That's so
key
weird.
component. That's the key difference. But okay, here's what I don't get. Here's what I
I
don't
was
get.
totally looking at it from a different angle, but that makes so much more sense.
So the first reality that it walks you through, where Donnie is not in his room, he does not die, and you are led to believe that that's like, I think that's meant to be like reality A, like the true reality. The thing about that one is when you get to the end of the movie and Gretchen is hit by a car and she dies, and Donnie's been sort of learning about all this time travel stuff, and he sort of figures out some stuff about Roberta Sparrow, the author of this book. It's the concept of when Donnie is talking to his teacher, and the teacher's saying something about a vessel and I think a wormhole, like a path or something. So my impression was that the vessel was the plane engine, and I thought that the engine was meant to have fallen from the plane of his mom. And wasn't there a scene like that at the end where the mom and the little sister are on a plane and they're coming back from wherever that competition was? And wasn't there the plane like
Yeah.
it seemed like the engine dropped, but then at the end you see the mom still and she's alive, and so I don't fully understand that.
In the reality where Donnie lives, Gretchen dies. He decides to die for her, and I don't know who controlled this. Maybe you'll know, but somehow the jet engine comes off, and I don't know if he is. I don't know who's in charge of it. It seems like just a freak thing.
Yeah.
But the jet engine flies off. In the reality where Donnie's alive, the jet engine flies off, and someone or something sends it through a portal into the reality where Donnie is about to get killed. And so Gretchen lives, everyone in his family lives, but he dies. Or you can have his whole family die and Gretchen die and he lives.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, you're right.
But I don't know who
You're
put the
right.
portal there.
No, you're right that the engine was from reality. It was from a plane crash in reality A. So what Donnie ended up doing somehow, manipulating. So in the reality A where Gretchen dies, I think something was manipulated, possibly by Donnie, for the plane to crash. So basically that leads me to believe that had reality gone on as it was going, Gretchen would have died. And then Donnie was basically going, okay, because this reality has already gone to crap, he brought that plane down somehow. But because they're then switching this reality, it doesn't matter because his mom and sister are still alive in reality B, and so is Gretchen. So he ends up being the only one that is sacrificed. Because, like you said, the engine came from a plane crash in reality A. And the reason I know this is because in the beginning of the movie, they went out of their way 2 different times. I think it was 2 different characters. One was the sister, and the other one maybe was the mom or something.
And they said they don't know
but
where
they
it came
said they don't know where it came from. They don't know where it came from. So it was definitely the other reality, which I hadn't thought that was a possibility. But yeah.
Yeah.
Was Jim Cunningham in the scene where the house is burning behind him, or was that just his house burning? I can't remember if he was actually physically in that scene.
No, he wasn't at the house.
Okay, because I thought I had an image in my head of like
There was a
him.
portrait of him.
Okay, yeah. So that kind of is like the Satan, like Antichrist imagery.
Yeah,
there
I
for
think
you.
so. He definitely represented some kind of evil, like, antagonist. I mean, obviously he was the antagonist, but it's just funny because you watch this movie like the first time and you see it as just this kind of rude, crappy kid that's just, trying to make everyone feel bad for everything that they do. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, these people are bad. And I never attributed that much meaning to it. And then this movie, this like last viewing, did kind of give me that feeling of, oh, there are purposes behind these things.
Because you're with me.
Yeah, I feel like I have to up my game.
So there were a couple of moments in the movie just that I thought were kind of like Easter eggs, sort of, for people that are interested and who haven't watched it super critically yet. But just a couple of moments where there was either an actual literal bunny in the background that was made to look like it was sort of staring and like hovering over the characters, or what appeared to me to be a bunny shape, the face of a bunny. So one was, I think it was when they were in the theater. If you look at the theater doors, it didn't look like the actual shape of a bunny, but the doors themselves had kind of what I thought looked a little bit like Frank's face. So one other moment, you guys, where you can kind of see the shape of a bunny, it was when Donnie and Gretchen are in the bedroom at the Halloween party and they're talking. There's a picture on the wall behind them, and it looks like Frank. So these are just interesting things to sort of look out for. It's abstract, which is why I noted it, because it wasn't just totally blatant, but just something if you're interested in the visuals. And then there were a couple scenes, particularly the one where they're sitting in the living room, they're watching the football game. It's the scene where what did you call those things? The paths they were coming out of them. Spears, yeah. That scene, there was a little pink bunny, just like, again, sort of looked like it was hovering over him, watching him. And I just thought that was kind of just an interesting thing that they did with the visuals in the movie to remind you that that was sort of always a presence for Donnie. You know, it's meant to always be a presence for the viewer too, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So on top of that, I think there were some interesting details. For instance, during the Halloween party, I'm sure you guys noticed this, they were playing the song Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division, which really well, just the title of that song and the hook of that song, you know, kind of sums up the story of Gretchen and Donnie. But on top of that, I remember when I was first kind of listening to Joy Division and was kind of researching a lot about them, the main singer, Ian Curtis, he had a lot of problems with seizures and just crazy depression, and he was just off the walls, you know, kind of a crazy person. And it is a sad story, but he ended up, I think, hanging himself. He committed suicide somehow, and I remember reading that, like, in his, like, final days, he had, like, if I remember correctly, I think he had, like, doomsday, you know, concepts running through his head that were leading him to suicide, which
That's interesting.
paralleled pretty nicely with Donnie in this movie. It was a good song to use in that scene. And on top of that, at the end of the movie, you see Frank in reality B, where he doesn't get shot by Donnie, and he is sitting, he's like laying next to his bed, and there's a sketch of a bunny mask, and then there's the actual like mold of the bunny mask that he's going to use. And throughout the whole movie, it's painted, so you see it, and it looks like, to me, it looks like rubber. But you see it in this scene, and it's not painted yet, and it's made of it looks like it's made of like silver or mercury. Like I don't know what or it's got like a chrome look to it, which I guess they're suggesting that it's metal, which might have some kind of, I feel like that's got to have some kind of significance about him going between realities and kind of being this, you know, extra dimensional figure that can travel like time and space and interact with Donnie. I think his mask had a big significance in that way. I think that was kind of like, because they talk about any metal object can go through these time portals.
This has become my new base for, that's interesting. My mic, but I don't say anything.
What do you think of that?
This is what I have to say about that.
What's up with
I
Lauren
think that's
Chen?
super interesting.
Shut up.
It's not Lauren Chen. That's a political commentator on YouTube.
Oh, is it? I mean,
It's
Chen.
Charita.
Charita. Charita Chen? It's Charita Chen.
It's, I want to say Charita Chen. Lauren Chen.
Shut up. I didn't, if you guys could explain to me, I don't really feel like looking it up, so if you guys want to comment and explain what the heck the significance is of Charita.
I actually have some thoughts about Charita.
Okay.
But I just want to say that what you just said about the mask blew my mind. The metal thing.
I'd never noticed it before.
Are you sure it was metal?
It looked like metal to me. I don't know why plastic would be silver and chrome finished.
That is
before
extremely
getting
interesting, the concept of it passing between realities.
Oh yeah, and on top of that, well, go ahead and, well, hold on.
Yeah, you
So
go
let's wait on on Charita. Let's wait on Charita.
The Chen thing.
That name just sounds like Chorito. Okay, so
I mean chorizo.
the chorizo. That's fine. The male. Okay, what's his name? Ugh.
Jim Cunningham.
No. So there's okay. So in the movie, you have that one science teacher who's dating Drew Barrymore's character. She's like a literature and English teacher, and he's like a science teacher. And it's so funny because she spends her whole time on the screen in the movie fighting to give the kids a different perspective. And she shows them all kinds of books that, some of the faculty and I guess the parents, namely that one lady, don't approve of, because it puts ideas in kids' minds. And she's just trying to open up the minds of the kids. And so she spends her whole, time at the school doing that. But then her boyfriend, you see him in not that many scenes except for one where he's talking to Donnie about the concept of time travel. And they kind of get into the topic of God. And so he sees that it's going a religious direction, or just that it's going a direction that he feels is outside of his, outside of his purview.
Jurisdiction, sort of.
Outside of his, he feels like it's outside of his jurisdiction. So he basically tells Donnie, look, I can't continue the conversation. I could lose my job. And I don't remember, I think that scene happens before Drew Barrymore loses her job, but I thought it was funny to see this couple where they clearly have a disconnect over what's important. And to him, it's his job, and to her, it's, teaching these kids, at whatever cost. And it was funny that they included them in that final kind of montage where you see they're both laying in bed together and there seems to be a disconnect between them. And you can see it in just the way they're sitting in the bed, that they aren't perfectly eye to eye on everything, literally and figuratively.
You noticed a lot of things that I did not notice, honestly.
I've seen the movie
That's
more.
Interesting. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good job.
So Chen,
We can just call her.
did you really have any thoughts on it?
I had some. So one thing that was interesting to me about Charita was that I particularly noticed when she started wearing those earmuffs, because it didn't seem, based on what everybody else was wearing, like it was really cold weather, but she was wearing these earmuffs in several of the scenes. And then at the end, there's this part where Donnie walks up to Charita, I'm pretty sure, and he pulls the earmuffs, or he kind of grabs onto the earmuffs, and she steps back and she steps out of them. And then in that moment, he sees on her notebook that she's been writing about him in her notebook and has a crush on him. And he smiles like he's, not weirded out by it. And he's views it as a positive thing. And my theory on the earmuffs was that she was kind of wearing them to isolate herself and sort of block out the world. And so I just thought that, I don't really know what the grand significance of it was. Yeah, with Donnie being, like you said, a Christ figure, I guess that is more significant because he kind of walks up to her and he sort of helps her. I mean, he initially scares her and surprises her, but he prompts her to step out of the earmuffs and sort of out of isolation, which is interesting. And then even though she's kind of freaked out in that moment, you can also tell that she's freaked out in a positive way. And then he sees...
You think so?
I thought she was. She seemed more like freaked out, but like feeling like seen, And then he saw what she'd written on the notebook and he smiled. And so I thought that was interesting, just sort of the idea of things, people do isolate themselves and it causes horrible things to happen. And, even though it's scary to be seen and scary to put yourself out there, that's a good thing ultimately, and there's implications to that if he is a Christ figure, his reaction and everything. In Reality B, there's a scene at the end.
What?
It's the same scene where Micah was talking about Frank and the mask. Not the same scene, but the same montage. And you see Charita laying there, and she looks like she's laying in bed, and she's kind of still, and her eyes look still. And it was my impression that her pillow looked like it could have had blood on it. And it was not enough of a solid visual that I could be sure. But I did write it down because I thought that it could have been possible that she might have committed suicide in reality B without Donnie. I think that was maybe a concept they were kind of
You think so?
introducing as a possibility. Like I said, you would have to look at the scene yourself to sort of decide if you think that that was a possible thing they were introducing. But to me, it was enough of, I mean, I had you rewind it. It was enough of a thing where I was like,
Oh,
you can't
that's
tell
why
for
you
sure.
rewinded? I thought she blinked or something.
No, well, exactly. She didn't blink. She was perfectly still, and her pillow looked like you could either interpret it like it was just a design or like it could have been blood. And I just thought that was an interesting, like in terms of Charita's story and the story they may have been telling with her about Donnie's impact on her. I thought that was a possibility. And then there is one part in the movie too. What did he say? Okay, so the part where he grabs onto her earmuffs and she steps out of them, what he had told her was, quote, "I promise that one day the world's going to be better for you." And that's when she steps away from him and out of the earmuffs. And so that, I don't know, I think that was interesting. And I don't think that that was like a main thing in the movie, but I do think that if you're looking to figure out everything they're trying to communicate, there's something to that.
I want to learn more about that for sure. I don't know what her significance really was.
So you don't, do you think anything that what I said could be possible?
It could be possible. I didn't think she looked dead, but I wasn't paying that close attention. I remember when you had me pause it and rewind it, and I was like, what could she possibly be looking at? I was like, there's nothing interesting going on the screen. And you're like, that character is dead.
There was a pumpkin on the table when Maggie Gyllenhaal's character was telling Donnie that she got into some school or something. The pumpkin on the table was carved to look like Frank, which is interesting. Did you have any insights about the actual scene where Gretchen gets killed? Because I think that's like sort of the culmination of the whole movie. Is like right there. It's got to be like, I don't know.
I wish I had turned on subtitles because there's a part when the car is coming where Donnie is being held down by that one douchey dude and douchey dude where he says something about savior. Can someone leave it in the comments if we get enough views where people want to leave a comment? Can someone leave in the comments what it is that he says? Because I'm curious. But he says something about that, and then she dies. And that, with all the comments that I was saying about there being Jesus imagery and symbolism in the movie, I don't know if he was trying to... I mean, he was definitely a savior for her in a different reality. But for, basically for this scene, it didn't really make sense to me, like what was going on. I don't know if he was just having some kind of weird moment. Are you having a moment right now? It is funny. The more you think about this movie, it really is just the story of a kid who all of a sudden has this person who is very strange following him around, telling him everything, and he learns time travel is a thing, and then his girlfriend dies, and he's like, well, I'm going to use time travel and fix her. Or save her.
I think that the significant theme in the movie is less about some trippy sort of psychological thing or time travel or something, and actually more about just human connection. I mean, that's what I keep coming away with. Like the part where his mom tells him, what did he say? He said something like, it must be great to have a son who... Oh,
he said, sorry, he was like, how do you feel that your son is such a wacko? Something like that. And she goes, it feels wonderful.
Yeah. There are a couple...
That was a sweet scene.
That was super sweet.
I like his mom.
I know. I loved his mom. Compared to Dwight's nanny as a mom.
What? I don't know what you're talking about. Dwight? From The Office? So this is how Donnie Darko and The Office tie together. Put that, just make the thumbnail.
1 degree of separation.
The parallels of The Office and Donnie Darko.
1 degree of separation. It's Dwight's nanny. Dwight's nanny is that crazy lady.
Oh my gosh, she is.
Wow. Okay.
Email?
You missed the most important thing about the movie.
I just have so many questions. She probably has so many answers too.
Oh my gosh.
I forgot about her. What else
We
has she
weren't
said that's
invited?
hilarious? We weren't invited. She says it. She's such a sweet, crazy
I
old lady in The
know.
Office, but in this movie, I hate
Oh,
her.
hold on. Okay, so I actually have some really good insights to talk about still, besides The Office. Okay, so Roberta Sparrow is the old lady with the mailbox, the lady who wrote the time traveling book. And she says to Donnie at one point, "Every living creature on Earth dies alone." What do you think about that?
I don't have anything profound to say.
I mean, it is interesting when you think about Donnie sacrificing himself. In reality B, he dies alone.
That's depressing and profound.
Yeah. This
I didn't
makes
think
me
about
like
that.
Donnie so
Everybody
much
dies
more,
alone.
even.
He dies alone, and Gretchen will die alone if she doesn't get a boyfriend.
She
He
has
definitely
time.
dies alone. That's sad.
Um,
They can't die together. Either she dies alone or he dies alone.
yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered about the significance of that. Good point. Wow. Yeah, I I I saw this movie like once a year from like high school, and just never really read into it. I just really liked watching it. I loved having it flashed in front of me, but
Do you think that it
watching it with
spoils?
intention made me learn a lot. What?
Does it spoil some of the mystery and the just sort of raw feeling that you get watching a movie like this when you kind of
I can appreciate
look
it more.
to sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I think the more I can make sense of it, the more I can appreciate all the work that went into it.
Me too, but not in the viewing where I'm specifically trying to catch things. Like when we watch the movie and I'm trying to make notes, it's not as like meaningful. But then even just going back and talking about it, I'm like, it makes me want to watch it again.
I definitely want to watch it again now.
One thing that was interesting, just like some trivia about the movie. So they filmed it over a period of 28 days, which matched the actual passage of time in the movie, which I thought was really, really cool because, they had the 28 days, like the future, prediction.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was. 28 days, 16 hours,
It was specific.
32 minutes, something like that.
But I thought that was kind of cool. And then another piece of trivia is so the movie came out in 2001. And it actually came out roughly a month after September 11th. And because a lot of the advertisement for the movie had the scenes from plane wreckage, they ended up not airing a lot of the advertisements. I think it wasn't advertised very much because of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And then I think I remember reading that because of that, it kind of had a slow start and then obviously picked up and won a lot of awards. But at first, it was kind of, its popularity was like dulled down a little because people didn't hear about it the way they would have.
That is interesting. 9/11 has been a big detail for me recently because I was listening to the Wilco album Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, I think is what it's called. And that album came out just after, I think, 9/11, but it was recorded before 9/11. And the album cover mixed with some of the things he says in different songs of the album kind of almost like predict 9/11. It's very weird. And I was watching South Park recently and they were talking about 9/11. Yeah. Anything that I keep coming across, like movies or shows or music that came out around that time, I always find out some detail about, they didn't want to release it for this reason, or they didn't want to advertise it, or
It's interesting to see ways that it affected our culture that we didn't even know it did.
yeah. It's just funny, like you can see how certain details will match up with certain events, and people are like, it's poor timing. People aren't ready to see this, I guess.
Micah, do you think there's any significance to the fact that when Donnie, I think it was early in the movie, he woke up at exactly midnight and he was hallucinating, I think for the first time on screen. Do you think there was any significance to the midnight thing?
I don't know. I didn't notice anything about the midnight. I noticed the clock had a sad face.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about midnight so much.
Okay. Then I have a couple other questions for you. So the quote that was on the chalkboard in the classroom where Drew Barrymore was teaching about a book that was controversial among the parents. The quote was, from I think a book called Breaking into Old Misery's House, and it's this. One moment the house had stood there with such quiet dignity between the bone sites, like a man in a top hat, and then bang crash, there wasn't anything left, not anything. Do you think there's any significance to that?
I think there is, but really to me it's more just an abstract encapsulation of what's going on in the main like crux of the movie of the plane crash.
I agree. And then when I think Donnie said something to the effect of, or he may have said this in response to Drew Barrymore's character, but at some point this was said, destruction is a form of creation. They just want to see what happens when they tear the world apart. They want to change things. And that was what Donnie said to the teacher when she asked him his take on it. And that was shortly before he flooded the school.
What do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't think it really is consistent with the Christ parallel. At least if it's alluding to the idea that his destruction was because he just wanted to see what happened and he just wanted to change things. I think we've talked about how there was actually a deeper purpose to some of the things he did than it initially appeared in the movie. I don't think he was just a teenager just looking to be destructive for the sake of being destructive or see what would happen, throwing a wrench in the works. I don't think that was really...
Or an axe in the works.
What?
Or an axe in the works. The waterworks.
Yeah. I missed that.
Just wording. You said a wrench in the works and I said an axe in the waterworks.
Okay. Oh, there was an axe in the movie. That's why I was confused. What?
Okay, so there's an alternate version of this movie as well. Well, you guys know that. But there's an alternate ending specifically where you can watch Donnie. You can see the scene of Donnie in his room after the jet engine falls into his room. And it pans around and you see him with like a giant stake impaling him, and he's like breathing in bed.
That's what was
and it's
in
the
the
most
movie.
horrifying
We
thing.
saw that the first
and it
time.
depresses me so much. And I don't know. I understand why they didn't leave it in there because it kind of has no point for being in the movie, but it's very depressing.
I totally forgot about that. Because I was waiting for that scene, that gruesome scene, and it never came. But I must have seen it the first time I watched it.
That scene hit me when I saw it. But
Okay.
I'm glad they left it out because it really didn't have any purpose.
So when they were talking, so this is sort of a second tier concept that was going on. But so when Dwight's nanny is teaching them all about how everything falls on the spectrum of fear and love, you were
that's
like,
just what you're
this would
calling
be
her?
interesting. Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know. I don't remember what her name was.
I didn't know you just remembered her as Dwight's nanny. That's funny.
I've never seen her in anything else.
I don't remember her name. We need to remember people's names before we do this.
Okay.
So continue your point.
But you had
I
said
have
in that
something to say about
moment, that would be an interesting thing to talk about, the idea of the theory that everything falls between a spectrum of fear and love. And Donnie was saying he disagreed because he thought that that was just leaving out. It was too reductive. You're leaving out this whole spectrum of other human emotion. What would be your 2 cents about that concept?
So on that concept, actually that and one other concept. I hate to give that lady credit and I hate to, disagree with Donnie, but there is something to be said for being reductive, but there's also something to be said for it's possible that, honestly, I think things do kind of fall onto that spectrum. I think fear and love are kind of a good way to just kind of talk about the contrast of everything. Because, I've read and listened to many things where people have talked about like the things that motivate people's behavior. And it seems like one of the most powerful motivators is like fear, and it's like fear of pain or discomfort. I would even reduce it even further to just fear. Like, are they acting on fear? And it's just kind of funny because it's like, I don't know how to say this. I would agree with her more than I would agree with him, I'm not good with words.
No, that was a good answer. I think that's kind of my take on it. I think that he wasn't necessarily saying something different because what he was saying was there's all sorts of other human emotions, and yes, there are. But the idea that everything you do is somehow traceable back to fear or love, I think holds some water. So
Yeah, I would agree with her. I know he's just trying to elaborate, but and also what was the other point? Oh, when they're talking about Drew Barrymore's character and how she's showing, kind of morbid and, kind of depraved books to the kids. My sister Brie and I have had this conversation, and she's brought it up a few times, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. But it's the concept of aesthetic distance, is what she calls it. I think it's a real term. But basically,
is it aesthetic distance or artistic distance?
aesthetic.
Okay.
And the concept is basically whatever you're writing or reading about or watching a movie about, is it going to affect you emotionally in the grander scheme of things? Is it going to affect your life in a negative way? Like, should you really be reading that book about, like I just read Night. Should you really read that book about Auschwitz? Is it going to give you a bunch of nightmares? Is it going to affect the way you view things? Are you going to become more bitter and cynical because you took in this piece of art? And so my sister Bree says she doesn't really watch things that are too dark because she has a problem with aesthetic distance. And she said one group of people that particularly struggle with this is teenagers, because they've got a million other things going on. They're very hormonal, first of all. They're likely to be really depressed. They don't really know what they're doing with their lives. So it always kind of bothered me, and apparently it bothers my sister too, she's an English major, that in high schools they're giving required reading to all these kids that's so dark. And it didn't bother me too much because I never read the required reading. I would just SparkNote it. But when you do look at the SparkNotes, you see that these books are really dark, or if you sometimes do read the books, you see that they're really dark and have horrible scenes of like rape and
I read
torture
In
and
Cold Blood
terribleness.
for the first time in high school, and that
my
informed
gosh.
my taste
I don't know
and
anything about
other
that book.
depressions.
Well, it's just like, yeah, exactly. I don't think teenagers need to be taking in that kind of stuff. They don't really know how to process those things. They don't have aesthetic distance. I guess it's the idea of like, can
Night
you
is
separate
also
yourself
required
from
reading.
the art? Yeah, Night was required reading. I remember East of Eden. Flowers for Algernon. I read that in 8th grade. That's a depressing book. Do you know what it's about?
No.
I barely remember, but I remember it was like some guy who had mental health issues, and he was like stalking this girl that he liked or something like that. Not like the best synopsis.
It's
But
like
aesthetic distance there's something to be said for that. And schools should not be giving these kind of books to kids because there's better ways to teach them good literature that, doesn't necessarily have to be dark. There's this idea that art has to be dark and in some way offensive for it to be deep. But I do like dark art. Like, I like that kind of stuff.
I think that sort of stuff can pique people's interest in a way that other stuff that's more mild maybe doesn't. So there's something to be said about that. To this day, I think In Cold Blood is still one of the most like engaging books I've ever read. And that was just about this family being murdered.
Is it fictional or non-fictional?
It's true. Wow. Which is fiction, right?
Non-fiction.
Yikes.
So is it true or not? Is it real?
It's true.
Okay. Think fiction, fantasy.
Okay.
Fiction,
Alliteration helps me.
fantasy. Fantastiction.
Have you ever heard of a spaghetti western?
Yes. Didn't we talk about this last time?
Yes.
We should watch a spaghetti
It
western.
was the last thing. I didn't know what it was.
We actually, from starting this thing, we've had people recommending mostly our family recommending movies that we should watch.
Plus one stranger on the internet.
Yeah, I'm actually excited. I am excited, but hey, you just got
Thank
a little
you.
shout out. I'm excited. I'm
Mhm.
excited to watch that movie too. We're gonna put that on our
fan.
list. We have been getting a lot of comments from people on what movies we should do, and everyone in our family is asking us So are you going to do, is it just foreign films? Is it just scary movies? And they're asking these things because the first movie we did was a foreign scary movie. And it's like, if I had watched Mission Impossible, would you be like, is it just going to be
movies with
Tom Cruise movies?
And the answer to that
You
is...
have one piece of data. No. You have one piece of data. You can't.
Multiple
Statistics.
variables.
Yes. Anyways. No, it's not just scary movies, and no, it's not just
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise. I would do a Jake Gyllenhaal series. I do like him.
Yeah, I would too. Okay. So quick thing just about...
Wait, I wasn't done with that point.
Okay, keep telling me about it.
So I've gotten some funny recommendations from people, and I'm about to crap on you and make you feel bad.
Me?
So, no, not you, family members.
Oh, okay.
I've heard
Look
some
out.
funny examples. Like,
Wait, hold on.
I'm trying to remember. I've heard some funny examples. Take my word for it.
That he can't think of right now.
I can think of one, but it's not really that funny.
I was just going to share with you guys that we
We've gotten
do
some
have...
bad ideas.
On our YouTube channel, if you go to the playlist tab, we've added something where we're basically collecting all of the movies that we're kind of watching right now, planning to watch, have watched, and really like, and would consider for the podcast. So if you're interested in what we're watching and you decide that our taste kind of suits your taste, it might be a good place to find recommendations. Yeah, that's there. So if you have any recommendations that you want to send our way, we may be sort of updating that as we go and adding things that people suggest. So that's a resource. Do you think that there's any significance to, at the end of the movie on the fridge, someone had written, Frank was here, went to get beer? Or is that meant to just sort of like
I like that it rhymed.
prep the next scene?
I don't know. Do you guys think there's any significance to that? Frank was here, went to get beer? I wish we had beer. We'll have beer for the next video.
Yeah.
I know I lied.
Or we won't, and we'll say we'll get it like we did last time.
Get ready for the next podcast. Do you have any more to add?
I think that might be it. Do you want to wrap up? Basically, that's it. I mean, I think
If you like this video, please leave a comment
like,
and give it a thumbs
subscribe.
up. Hey, and be here next time. Get a case of beer because we'll have beer.
And share it with us through the screen because clearly we have problems with picking up our own beer.
Okay, we'll pick up some beer. We'll pick up some beer and we'll clink the screen. Like,
We will cheers you personally right here.
yeah.